The alien females want my human DNA, but they insist on the natural method. The morning sun rose over the city of New Boston, painting the streets in pale gold. Birds chirped as Dr. Mason Hale sipped his coffee, scrolling through the news. Most days he enjoyed the quiet rhythm of his life, researching human genetics, writing reports, and sometimes lecturing students at the university. But today, a news alert blinked on his screen, one that made him freeze. A massive object had entered the solar system. Not a comet, not an asteroid, and certainly not a human-made ship. It was an enormous vessel, unlike anything astronomers had ever recorded. Its surface shimmered with strange patterns, reflecting sunlight in colors that did not exist in any known spectrum. Mason felt a thrill run down his spine. He had studied the stars for years, but he had never expected a visitor like this. By noon, the world's governments had scrambled their best scientists, military experts, and diplomats. Everyone wanted to know what or who was aboard this alien ark. But instead of sending ambassadors or weapons, the aliens made a request that shocked humanity even more. They wanted to meet a single human. The news conference streamed live across the globe. Mason, sitting in his small office, nearly spilled his coffee. His name had been recommended by the United Nations Science Council. He was the leading anthropologist studying human DNA and culture, not because of fame, but because of his quiet, meticulous work. Now he was being summoned to the greatest meeting in human history. At first, Mason thought it was a prank. His inbox flooded with urgent messages, all signed with the same strange symbol, one that seemed to shift as he blinked at it. He read aloud, "Dr. Mason Hale, you have been chosen to assist the Orali. Your species' genetic knowledge and cultural insight are required. Arrival within 24 hours is requested. All questions shall be answered upon meeting." Mason rubbed his eyes. The Orali. He had seen rumors of alien life before, but nothing real. And now these beings, these advanced female scientists, were asking for him personally. Within hours, Mason was escorted to a massive spaceport at the edge of the city. He looked up at the alien ark. It was larger than any human-made structure, floating silently above the clouds, radiating light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The humans around him whispered nervously. Some clutched their children. Some recorded videos, hoping to capture history. Mason felt his stomach tighten. He was about to step into a world beyond imagination. The transport to the ark was swift. Mason's ship ascended into the sky, passing through the glowing force field that surrounded the vessel. Inside, everything was quiet. The walls of the corridor shimmered with soft, golden light. Mason's first thought was that he was in a dream or perhaps a painting. Then he saw them. The Orali emerged from the light. They were tall, graceful, with luminous skin that glowed faintly in the corridor. Their eyes were large, intelligent, and filled with curiosity. Unlike humans, their movements were smooth and deliberate, as if each step was calculated yet natural. Mason swallowed hard. These were not invaders. They were something entirely different. One stepped forward. "Welcome, Dr. Mason Hale," she said in perfect English, though her lips did not move in the usual way. "We are the Orali. We come seeking your guidance." Mason bowed slightly. "Guidance? For what exactly?" The lead Orali tilted her head, studying him. "Our species faces extinction. For centuries, we have relied on cloning to preserve life. But over time, our genetic diversity has diminished. We lack variation. We lack humanity." Mason blinked. "Humanity? Yes," she said. "Your species is unique. Not because of strength or technology, but because of culture, creativity, and emotion. Your DNA is valuable, but not in isolation. We require your guidance in the natural way humans maintain life. We wish to learn, not take. We wish to understand, not control." Mason felt a mixture of fear and awe. He had read about alien civilizations imagining human flaws, human strengths, but this was beyond his research. They were asking not for genetic samples alone, but for the human method itself. The natural method of human survival, growth, and diversity. "What do you mean exactly?" he asked cautiously. The Orali led him to a central chamber, a vast dome filled with floating lights and bioengineered plants. It was not a lab as humans knew it. It was a living ecosystem, humming with soft energy. "We wish to understand the principles of your species," the Orali explained. "How humans form communities, how humans teach, nurture, and inspire, how humans maintain genetic and cultural health. We do not desire cloning. We desire the natural method, life taught by life." Mason felt the weight of the request. Teaching aliens the human way, his way, was not a small task. This was not a classroom. This was the future of a species in the balance. Over the next hours, Mason walked through the Ark with the Orali, observing their technology. Machines hovered silently, analyzing samples without invasive methods. Holographic screens displayed data streams in shapes Mason could barely comprehend. Yet despite their brilliance, the Orali lacked something he took for granted: spontaneity, humor, emotion, variation. They have perfected science, Mason thought, but they have lost life. Finally, Mason was shown the first step in his task: teaching emotion. They wanted him to explain human laughter, storytelling, conflict, and cooperation. "We understand the mechanisms of DNA," the Orali said, "but we do not understand the mechanisms of life lived naturally. That is why we requested you." Mason nodded slowly. It was clear that this was bigger than him, bigger than Earth, bigger than the solar system. If the Orali learned the natural human method, they might survive. If not, they might vanish, leaving the stars emptier than before. That night, Mason rested in a chamber resembling a human bedroom, though everything glowed faintly with alien light. He stared out the window at the blue planet below. Earth looked small, fragile, yet alive. He thought of his students, his colleagues, the people who took life for granted. And now, humanity itself was being asked to teach another species the secret of life, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as mentors. The next morning, Mason began his lessons. He started simple. "Humans survive not only through strength or intelligence," he said, speaking to a group of the Orali assembled in the dome. "We survive through culture, through care, through the choices we make for each other. That is the natural method." The Orali listened intently, their glowing eyes fixed on him. They asked questions he had never considered. "Why do humans teach children through play?" one asked. "Why do humans sing when alone? Why do humans cry?" Mason smiled. "Because we must. Because that is how life continues. You cannot measure it in machines or data. You must experience it. You must live it." And as he spoke, Mason began to realize the true challenge. Teaching DNA was one thing. Teaching life, its beauty, its messiness, its unpredictability, was another. But if anyone could do it, perhaps humans could. After all, humanity had survived deserts, oceans, wars, and disasters simply by being adaptable and resilient. The Orali nodded. "We will follow your guidance," they said. "Teach us the natural method, Dr. Mason Hale. Teach us to live." And with that, Mason took his first step into history, not as a conqueror, not as a hero, but as a teacher. And the fate of an entire alien species, and the legacy of humanity, rested in his hands. The stars outside the Ark seemed brighter that day, as if acknowledging a new chapter in the universe. Mason knew the path ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time, he felt the weight of something far greater than science: hope. And in the quiet hum of the alien Ark, Mason smiled. Humanity had a lesson to teach. And perhaps the galaxy was ready to learn. The alien Ark floated silently in the orbit above Earth, a silent giant of light and technology. Dr. Mason Hale had spent only a few days aboard, yet already he could feel the enormity of his task. The Orali were brilliant, precise, and curious, but they were utterly unfamiliar with the chaos of life that humans thrived in. Mason's first lesson began in the central dome, where floating gardens drifted like clouds and soft light bathed the chamber. Hundreds of Orcs scientists gathered around him, their glowing eyes focused on every movement, every word. Mason knew he needed to start simple. Humans are not just DNA, he said. We are more than our genes. We survive through cooperation, culture, and emotion. That is how we maintain diversity and growth. The Orcs tilted their heads. Explain emotion, one said. We have data on neural signals and hormonal responses, but we do not understand purpose beyond survival. Mason smiled. Purpose beyond survival is what makes life worth living. Humans teach, care, love, and celebrate. That is our natural method. He began with childhood learning. Using holographic displays, Mason showed the Orcs how human children learn through play, imitation, and stories. We do not just teach facts, he said. We teach curiosity. We teach trust. Children learn about the world by experimenting, by making mistakes, by laughing, and sometimes by failing. The Orcs watched intently as Mason projected holograms of children exploring forests, building sandcastles, and helping each other solve problems. Why not just give them all the answers? One Orc asked. Because the answers alone do not build intelligence, Mason replied. Understanding grows through experience. That is the natural method. A child who learns to help a friend, to share, or to create will grow resilient and adaptable. That is how our species survives unpredictable challenges. Next, Mason moved to human communities. He explained the importance of family, friendships, and social bonds. Our DNA is important, yes, he said, but what really matters is how we care for one another. Families, teachers, leaders, these relationships teach humans values, skills, and trust. The Orcs were fascinated. They had systems for genetic replication, for preserving knowledge, and even for predicting behavior, but they had no concept of emotion shaping society. You are saying culture protects life? One asked. Yes, Mason replied. Culture is life. It is the invisible network that binds DNA into people. A strong culture encourages growth, diversity, and survival. A weak culture, well, look at what happens when societies collapse. Genes may survive, but humanity dies. Then came the most unusual lesson, art and creativity. Mason led the Orcs to the music chamber, where the floating lights responded to sounds and motion. He played recordings of human music, showing paintings and displaying literature. Humans create not because it is necessary, he said, but because it expresses our identity. Creativity encourages problem-solving, imagination, and collaboration. It shapes our brains to think in new ways, ways machines cannot fully replicate. Orcs scientists were mesmerized. Some even attempted to mimic the instruments and colors. Their first attempts were awkward, notes were off, colors clashed, but Mason encouraged them. Mistakes are part of learning. Even failure is a teacher. By midweek, Mason moved on to decision-making and moral reasoning. He presented simulations where humans faced dilemmas, whether to share resources, risk safety for others, or negotiate with strangers. The Orcs struggled at first. They preferred predictable outcomes. But Mason guided them through reasoning, explaining that uncertainty and empathy often drove better long-term survival than pure logic. You mean humans succeed despite mistakes? An Orc asked. Exactly, Mason said. Mistakes are unavoidable, but how we respond defines us. A species that learns from errors grows stronger than one that avoids them entirely. The most challenging lesson came in emotional resilience. Mason taught the Orcs how humans handle grief, joy, fear, and hope. They observed human rituals, funerals, celebrations, reunions, and Mason explained the deeper meaning. Emotions are not weaknesses, he said. They are tools. They motivate action, create bonds, and transmit knowledge. Without emotions, life is merely survival. With emotions, life is meaningful, adaptive, and lasting. The Orli were cautious but attentive. Slowly, they began to emulate behaviors. A few began to form small social groups, sharing tasks, discussing ideas, and even experimenting with humor. They laughed awkwardly at Mason's jokes, but it was laughter nonetheless. Mason felt a thrill. He had planted the seed of humanity, but not all Orli were convinced. Some scientists worried that human emotion could corrupt logic, cause chaos, or threaten the Ark's order. "Your methods may be inefficient," one said. "Humans waste energy on rituals, art, and sentiment. Why not streamline survival?" Mason responded calmly. "Efficiency without adaptability is fragile. Nature favors those who can respond to uncertainty. Human life is messy, yes, but that mess creates resilience." To prove his point, Mason organized an experiment. He selected groups of Orli to solve complex survival scenarios. Some followed purely logical protocols, while others integrated Mason's methods: empathy, collaboration, and improvisation. The results were astonishing. Groups using only logic succeeded in predictable tasks but failed when unexpected variables appeared. Groups applying human-inspired strategies adapted, solved problems creatively, and even discovered solutions that Mason had not predicted. The Orli were stunned. "It seems your species' inefficiency is actually a strength," one admitted. "Yes," Mason said. "That is the natural method. Diversity, emotion, culture, they are not obstacles. They are survival tools." Over the next week, Mason introduced more concepts: rituals to mark life stages, games to teach cooperation, and storytelling to preserve knowledge. He emphasized teamwork, mutual respect, and the value of mistakes. Slowly, the Orli began to integrate these behaviors into their society. In private moments, Mason observed the subtle changes. Orli scientists who had never expressed individuality now decorated their chambers. They experimented with colors, music, and even casual conversation. Laughter, debate, and curiosity spread like light through the Ark. The once precise and ordered society now showed the beginnings of unpredictability, a sign of life. One evening, Mason walked alone in the floating garden, reflecting on his progress. He realized the challenge was far from over. Teaching human methods was not just about demonstrations or lessons. It was about instilling understanding. The Orli needed to internalize these lessons, to embrace imperfection, to value choice over control. And yet, Mason felt a sense of pride. For the first time, he saw human uniqueness reflected in an alien species. The Orli were no longer just students. They were becoming participants in life itself. The next morning, however, a warning arrived. A faction of Orli, skeptical of Mason's methods, had expressed concern to the Ark's leadership. They argued that adopting human behaviors could destabilize society, endanger DNA integration projects, and threaten the survival of their species. Mason knew this was inevitable. True growth always invites resistance, but he remained confident. "Humans face doubt and fear every day," he said to himself. "We survive because we persist, because we adapt, and because we trust one another. The Orli can learn the same." For the first time, Mason glimpsed the larger purpose of his work. Teaching humans to the Orli was more than survival. It was hope. The hope that a species could rise above mere replication, embrace complexity, and flourish across the stars. As the Ark continued its orbit, Mason prepared for the next lessons: conflict resolution, emotional resilience in crises, and the art of leadership. He knew challenges lay ahead, but for the first time he felt that human methods, messy, emotional, unpredictable, might just save an entire civilization. And in that moment, Mason understood the true power of humanity. Not strength, not technology, but life itself, taught naturally, experienced fully, and shared freely. The stars outside the dome twinkled as if agreeing. a silent witness to the first steps of a human-alien partnership that could change the galaxy forever. The alien ark glowed softly as it orbited Earth, a silent testament to advanced science and unparalleled beauty. For weeks, Dr. Mason Hale had been teaching the Orli the natural human method: cooperation, emotion, culture, and creativity. Many of the scientists embraced the lessons, forming small groups, experimenting with art and sharing ideas. Laughter, curiosity, and discussion now echoed through the dome where silence once reigned. Yet not all Orli were pleased. A faction of elite scientists, known as the Consortium of Logic, watched Mason's lessons with increasing concern. They feared the introduction of emotion and unpredictability would destabilize their society. To them, the Ark had always functioned on precise algorithms, controlled replication, and perfect predictability. The messy ways of humans were dangerous, even reckless. "We cannot allow these methods to continue," argued Lyra, a senior member of the consortium, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the council chamber. "Mason's teachings are corrupting our society. He encourages individuality over conformity, unpredictability over order. If we continue, our species risks chaos." Another council member, Vela, nodded gravely. "We may be losing control. The younger scientists are already experimenting with these human practices. They are laughing, making mistakes, even questioning leadership." "This cannot continue." Lyra's voice sharpened. "Then we must intervene. Mason's methods must be stopped before they destroy everything we have built." Meanwhile, Mason was unaware of the growing tension. That morning, he was in the central dome, leading an exercise in conflict resolution. Two Orli groups had been presented with a simulated crisis: a sudden energy shortage in a critical biolab. The first group relied purely on logical algorithms, assigning tasks and calculating precise outcomes. The second group followed Mason's guidance, discussing options, sharing responsibilities, and factoring in each participant's skills and emotions. The difference was clear. The first group failed when unexpected variables appeared. Their calculations could not adapt to an unforeseen energy spike. The second group improvised, adjusted roles, and collaborated successfully. Mason watched, pleased. "This is exactly what I mean," he said to the observing scientists. "Life is unpredictable. To survive, you must adapt. Logic alone cannot solve everything. Emotion, cooperation, and creativity are strengths, not weaknesses." Some Orli nodded in understanding, but others frowned. They whispered among themselves, uneasy with this new unpredictability. By evening, the consortium of logic had acted. Using their influence, they attempted to seize control of the Ark's central systems, intending to halt all experiments inspired by human methods. They cut off energy to sections of the dome, froze ongoing simulations, and ordered strict lockdowns. Mason was notified immediately. Alarmed, he rushed to the command center, where glowing screens displayed the consortium's actions. "They're trying to reverse everything we've built," he muttered to himself. "If they succeed, all our progress will vanish." He turned to the loyal Orli who had embraced the human methods. "We cannot let them take control, but we will not fight with force. We fight with what humans do best: trust, communication, and cooperation." Mason divided the loyal scientists into teams. Each team had a clear task: maintain critical systems, protect ongoing genetic experiments, and engage with the consortium using reason, empathy, and dialogue. The first confrontation occurred in the research chamber. Lyra and her group entered, expecting resistance. Instead, they were met with calm discussion. Mason addressed them directly. "Lyra," he said, "I understand your concerns. Your society values precision, control, and logic. That is admirable, but consider this: a species cannot survive on logic alone. Life is unpredictable, full of change and challenge. By refusing to adapt, you risk extinction." Lyra's eyes narrowed. You presume humans understand our species better than we do. I do not presume, Mason said firmly. I demonstrate. Watch what happens when we combine your brilliance with human methods. Observe how adaptability, trust, and emotion solve problems you cannot calculate. To prove his point, Mason led a controlled simulation. A sudden system failure affected the Ark's energy distribution. The consortium's purely logical plan failed. Their calculations could not accommodate the unexpected sequence. Meanwhile, the hybrid teams, using collaboration, communication, and creativity, restored balance. They improvised solutions, reassigned tasks, and protected vital resources. The demonstration stunned the consortium members. They had never witnessed adaptability beyond logic succeed so completely. Perhaps we underestimated this approach, Vela admitted reluctantly. Lyra's expression hardened. One success does not change the principle. Emotion is unpredictable. Individuality creates errors. If we allow this influence to spread, the Ark may collapse. Mason shook his head. No, Lyra. Individuality, emotion, and adaptability are not errors. They are survival mechanisms. Life is not a calculation. Life is experience, choice, and growth. The conflict escalated over the next few days. The consortium attempted to regain control of critical labs, redirect genetic projects, and restore the rigid structure of their society. Mason responded by organizing a campaign of trust and collaboration. He encouraged loyal Orli to communicate, share ideas, and even debate openly. No force was used, only dialogue, reasoning, and demonstration. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Scientists who had been undecided started participating in human-inspired methods. They shared ideas, collaborated across departments, and began to see value in the messiness of life. The consortium found themselves increasingly isolated. Their rigid rules could not compete with the energy of a motivated, cooperative society. In one pivotal moment, Mason invited the consortium to witness the integration of human DNA with Orli genetics. Carefully prepared samples were nurtured in controlled environments. For the first time, the Orli could observe how genetic variation, guided by human methods, produced robust, resilient life forms. The results were undeniable. The DNA integrated successfully, creating new organisms capable of surviving in unexpected conditions. Machines alone could not have produced these outcomes. It was human-inspired unpredictability, the natural method, that made the difference. Lyra watched silently, her glowing eyes reflecting the thriving genetic samples. For hours she observed the careful growth, the delicate balance, the resilience of life born from choice, care, and variation. Slowly, her confidence in the old methods began to waver. Finally, Mason addressed her directly. Lyra, the natural method does not replace your logic. It complements it. Together, logic and adaptability create strength far beyond what either could achieve alone. Lyra's expression softened, though pride still lingered. Perhaps humans have lessons worth learning, she admitted. The confrontation ended not with violence but with understanding. The consortium could not ignore the evidence. Mason had not overpowered them with force. He had demonstrated that life, taught naturally and nurtured with care, was more powerful than rigid control. Over the next days, the Ark changed in subtle but profound ways. Orli scientists collaborated across divisions, shared discoveries, and experimented with creativity and improvisation. The halls echoed with discussion, laughter, and curiosity. Mason observed the transformation with a sense of quiet pride. His task had not been easy. He had faced skepticism, fear, and opposition. But human methods, cooperation, emotion, and adaptability had prevailed without a single act of violence. The Ark was no longer a vessel of pure logic and precision. It was alive, vibrant, and full of potential. Life had returned to a species that had nearly lost it, As he walked through the floating gardens that evening, Mason reflected on what he had learned himself. Teaching humans to the Orli had been challenging, yes, but he had also seen the strength of humanity reflected in their eyes, the ability to inspire, to adapt, and to persist. The rebellion of logic had been the true test. Not the failure of machines, not the limits of technology, but the confrontation of rigid order with living, breathing adaptation. And humanity had shown the way. Mason looked out the observation window at the planet below. Earth seemed small, fragile, yet alive. But he knew that its influence now extended far beyond its atmosphere. The Orli, once bound by algorithms and cloning, had glimpsed the power of human life, the natural method. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the ark, Mason smiled. Humanity's lesson had been learned, not through dominance but through example, not through fear but through trust, not through violence but through the messy, beautiful, unpredictable power of life itself. The stars outside the ark twinkled as if acknowledging the triumph of human ingenuity. Mason knew that the greatest challenge still lay ahead, ensuring that the Orli could maintain this balance and continue growing without returning to rigid control. But for now, the rebellion of logic had been overcome. The ark was alive with life, curiosity, and hope, a testament to humanity's unique ability to teach not just DNA, but the very essence of what it means to live. And Mason, the chosen human, had once again reminded the galaxy that life, nurtured naturally and guided by care, is stronger than any algorithm. The alien ark glimmered like a jewel in orbit above Earth. Weeks of lessons, experiments, and collaboration had transformed it from a rigid vessel of logic into a thriving hub of life and curiosity. Dr. Mason Hale walked through the central dome, marveling at the changes. The once silent corridors now buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the quiet hum of creativity. Everywhere he looked, the Orli were experimenting, learning, and growing. They painted murals on floating walls, composed music using light and sound, and debated complex ideas with both logic and emotion. Mason had introduced them to human methods, but now the Orli had begun to expand upon them, combining their own intelligence with humanity's adaptability. The final phase of his mission had arrived: integration of human DNA into the Orli gene pool. Unlike traditional cloning, this process relied on careful natural adaptation. Mason had spent days preparing the procedures, ensuring that the DNA would combine safely and effectively. But this time, he did not act alone. Loyal Orli scientists, now fully embracing the natural method, stood beside him. Together, they monitored every sequence, shared observations, and adjusted techniques in real time. The cooperation was seamless, a perfect reflection of the principles Mason had taught. As the first samples were introduced into the biolabs, Mason observed with a mixture of awe and pride. The DNA responded, not just surviving but thriving. Small variations emerged naturally, creating organisms with resilience, adaptability, and unexpected beauty. Machines alone could never have produced this outcome. It was the combination of human methods and Orli intelligence, the natural method in action. Lyra, once the leader of the consortium of logic, watched silently. For weeks she had resisted Mason's teachings, fearing chaos and disorder. But now, seeing the vibrant life forms, she understood. Logic and emotion, precision and adaptability, tradition and creativity, they did not conflict. Together they created strength far beyond what either could achieve alone. "This is remarkable," Lyra said quietly. Her voice, once sharp with skepticism, now held a tone of wonder. "Perhaps we were wrong to resist." Mason smiled. "You weren't wrong to question. Questions are necessary, but the answer lies not in control but in balance. Life thrives when choice, care, and adaptability guide it." The integration continued over several days. The DNA sequences began to show unique combinations. traits that neither humans nor Orli had possessed before. The Orli observed every development with fascination, learning to respect the unpredictability that Mason had emphasized. Outside the lab, changes were also occurring. Social groups among the Orli grew stronger. Teams formed spontaneously, sharing skills and ideas. The once emotionless society now expressed joy, curiosity, and even humor. Music and art filled the halls. The Ark had become alive, not just in a physical sense but in culture, spirit, and purpose. Mason reflected on what this meant for the future. Humanity's methods had not only preserved life, but they had also enhanced it. The Orli would carry these lessons forward, ensuring that their species could thrive without relying solely on rigid systems or cloning. They would remember that life is strengthened by emotion, creativity, and collaboration. But the final test was yet to come. A sudden solar flare threatened the Ark's energy systems, causing alarms to blare and lights to flicker. The consortium of logic spheres echoed in the control room. Could this society, now embracing unpredictability, survive a real crisis? Mason did not hesitate. "We respond together," he said calmly. "Use your knowledge, your skills, your intuition. Communicate, adapt, trust each other." Teams of Orli immediately sprang into action. Some focused on stabilizing energy flows while others rerouted life support systems. Mason guided groups in real time, applying human-inspired strategies, improvisation, collaboration, and shared decision-making. The outcome was extraordinary. Not only did the team stabilize the Ark, but they also discovered improved methods for future crises. The combination of logic, intelligence, and human-style adaptability had created solutions beyond what machines or rigid algorithms could achieve. When the alarms finally ceased, a cheer echoed through the halls. The Ark had survived the solar flare, stronger and more resilient than before. Mason watched the Orli celebrate, not just the technical success, but the success of their new way of life. That evening, a ceremony was held in the central dome. The Orli honored Mason in their own tradition, a symbolic ritual combining light, music, and shared storytelling. Each scientist recounted what they had learned from him, how human methods had changed their society, and how they would carry these lessons forward. Lyra stepped forward, her expression solemn but sincere. "Dr. Mason Hale, you have taught us that life is more than replication. Life is choice. Life is care. Life is growth. Humanity has shown us the way, and we will not forget." Mason felt a lump in his throat. He had never expected such recognition, not for himself but for humanity. "Thank you," he said simply. "Remember this, your strength comes not from perfection but from resilience, not from control but from collaboration, not from precision but from living fully." The Orli nodded, their glowing eyes reflecting understanding and gratitude. Mason knew that Earth's influence had extended far beyond its orbit. Humanity had shown the galaxy the value of its methods, the natural human method, and the lesson would echo for generations. As he walked to the observation deck, Mason gazed down at Earth. It looked peaceful, small, yet vibrant. Life on that fragile planet had inspired hope across the stars. And the stars themselves seemed to twinkle brighter, as if acknowledging the triumph of life nurtured naturally. The Ark, once a symbol of logic and rigidity, had become a living example of collaboration and adaptability. The Orli would survive. They would flourish. And they would carry forward the lessons of humanity. Mason allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought of human history, wars, disasters, challenges, and triumphs. Humans had endured not because they were perfect, not because they were the strongest, but because they adapted, collaborated, and cared for each other. That same essence had now transformed an entire alien civilization. He also knew that his work was not done. The Orli would continue to face challenges, and humanity's methods would need to be applied, tested, and refined. But Mason had faith. The natural method, taught with care and practiced with understanding, was powerful. It could preserve life, inspire growth, and overcome even the most difficult obstacles. That night, as Mason rested in his chamber aboard the Ark, he reflected on the journey. From the first hesitant lessons in emotion and cooperation to the triumph of the solar flare crisis, he had seen humanity reflected in another species. And he had seen another species transform, thriving because humans had shared what they had often taken for granted, the natural method of life. The Orcs children, born from integrated DNA sequences, would inherit not only genetic diversity, but also the principles of human growth, adaptability, and culture. They would learn through experience, creativity, and cooperation. The future of their species was now intertwined with humanity's legacy. As the Ark orbited Earth, Mason felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Humanity had once again proven its unique value in the galaxy, not through weapons, dominance, or technology alone, but through something far more enduring: the ability to teach life itself, naturally, fully, and freely. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the stars seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if celebrating the triumph of life, hope, and the enduring spirit of humanity. Mason smiled, knowing that this was not the end but a beginning. A beginning of a partnership between humans and the Orcs, a future where knowledge, care, and adaptability could spread across the galaxy. Humanity had given more than DNA. They had given life itself, in all its messy, beautiful, unpredictable glory. And in that glow, Mason understood the greatest truth of all. Humanity's power lies not in strength, but in its capacity to teach, inspire, and live fully. The Ark hummed with life, Earth shone below, and for the first time in centuries, the Orcs knew that their species would endure. Not because of perfection, not because of machines, but because of the human lesson. Life is strongest when it is lived naturally, guided by care and shared freely. And thus, a new chapter began, not only for the Orcs but for the galaxy and for humanity itself.